The Shamanic Journey, a practical guide to therapeutic shamanism. Chapter 1. Getting clear what shamanism is and what it isn't. Where shamanism is from. In teaching shamanism beginners days, one of the things I sometimes start with is to ask people where they think shamanism is from. Generally, people tend to associate it with a particular region or culture. Many people associate it with Native American tribes, particularly from North America, or sometimes from Central to South America. Other people associate shamanism with the Mongolian or the Siberian peoples, or sometimes with the Inuit people of the Arctic Circle. Some people think of it as being African. Some people associate it with Aboriginal Australian cultures. The truth is that shamanism has been practiced literally all over the world. Early humans lived as hunter-gatherer tribes, and as far as we know, there has not been a single hunter-gatherer tribe in the history of human race that did not practice shamanism, in the broad sense of the word. Over 30 years ago, I studied shamanism at university. I studied the shamanic cultures from as far apart as Nepal, Africa, New Guinea, Polynesia, and Central America, cultures from many different parts of the world. There is a book called Shamanism, an encyclopedia of world beliefs, practices, and cultures by Walter and Friedman. It is full of scholarly articles about shamanic practices throughout the world. There are sections on North America, with chapters discussing shamanism from the Inuit tribes of the north through to shamanic practices around the south in the New Orleans area, and from the Atlantic East Coast through to the Pacific West Coast. Further sections in the book are on shamanism in Central America, South America, Asia, Siberia, Mongolia, China, Korea, Japan, Tibet, India, Burma, Malaysia, Australia, Australasia, Africa, Scandinavia, and even Europe. Yes, once here in Europe, we had our own shamanic cultures too. Given that all tribes practice shamanism, then all tribes have, or would have had, their own word for shamanism. In England, where I was born and raised, the original word has long been lost. The word we use in English is shamanism, is from the Tungus tribe of the Siberia-Mongolia region. It entered the English language, and only Tungus word to do so to the best of my knowledge. Sometimes in the 1600s, it was first applied by Western anthropologists to the ancient religion of the Turks and Mongols and those of the neighboring Tungustic and Samoyedic speaking peoples. It then began to be used to describe practices found in other parts of the world, including Asia, Africa, Australasia, and the Americas, as anthropologists gradually began to realize how widespread and similar these practices and beliefs are. In the 1960s and 70s, the anthropologist Michael Harner began to realize that you could take a shaman from anywhere in the world, say from the Amazon basin, and sit them down with a shaman from Siberia, and with aid of an interpreter, they would describe incredibly similar shamanic practices and beliefs. What Harner realized as she studied shamanic cultures is that underneath the cultural trappings of a particular tribe's shamanic practices, there is a series of core beliefs and practices that are essentially common to all shamanic cultures. For such a set of practices, beliefs to be so consistent throughout such wildly diverse and geographically widespread cultures is truly remarkable. It is almost as if these beliefs and practices must be somehow innate, hardwired into us, and in fact, as I will discuss later, this does seem to be the case. That aside, for these practices to be so widespread and so consistent, people must find that A, they work, and B, they are worth practicing and pursuing. What is clear is that humans take these core practices and beliefs and adapt them to make them relevant to the environment, climate, and times in which they live. Harner wrote that this core shamanism, in his classic book, The Way of a Shaman, published in 1980, it is this book and Harner's subsequent teachings over the last 30-plus years that is largely responsible for the current rebirth and renaissance of shamanism that we are now seeing in the West. How old is it? So shamanism has been practiced throughout the world, and in a coherent and consistent form. The next question is, how old is it? This is a matter of much scholarly debate, and in some ways the answer comes down to how exactly one defines shamanism. However, there are cave paintings in Europe that date back around 33,000 BC, which are generally thought to depict shamanic practices. This would make shamanism at least 35,000 years old. To put this into context, the oldest of the organized religions that still exist in the modern era are probably the Hindu and the Jain religions, which date from around about 1700 BC, so under 4,000 years old. This makes shamanism vastly older than any of the existing organized religions. To put this in another context, the Roman Empire was at its height around 2,000 years ago. The domestication of dogs happened around 12,000 years ago, whilst shamanism was being practiced 35,000 years ago. Could shamanism be older still? The problem with going any further back in time is that definitive evidence becomes scant. One intriguing thing I saw on a television program a few years ago was a discussion by an anthropologist about a piece of yellow ochre rock that had carvings on it. The object had been found in the Blombos caves in South Africa. The proposal was that this object was probably a shamanic ritual object. Carbon dating put this carving back around 75,000 BC. If this is indeed a shamanic object, then that makes shamanism nearly 80,000 years old. In 2008, in the same cave, the remains of an ochre processing area were found. Ochre is widely used in shamanic societies for body painting. This is rarely done purely for ornamentation and decoration, but as part of sacred shamanic practices. This paint factory has been carbon dated at around 100,000 years old. Interesting as these archaeological findings are, if you ask indigenous peoples how old shamanism is, they would generally say that we have been practicing shamanism for as long as we have been human. Bill Plotkin, in his excellent book Soulcraft, quotes an Inuit saying, "In the very earliest time, when both people and animals lived on Earth, a person could become an animal if he wanted to, and an animal could become a human being. Sometimes they were people and sometimes animals. There was no difference. All spoke the same language. This was a time when words were like magic. The human mind had mysterious powers. A word spoken by chance might have strange consequences. It would suddenly come alive, and what people wanted to happen could happen. All you had to do was say it. Nobody can explain this. That's just the way it was." This saying contains many things that anyone already familiar with shamanism will immediately recognize. One is that humans can somehow become animals. Another is that we can talk to animals and that animals can talk to us. Another is that there is really no difference between us and animals. And yet another is that our words and our thoughts have power, and that our words have consequences and can take on a life of their own. Mythos and logos. Before going further, I feel it necessary to clarify the difference between mythos and logos. Mythos is something that is metaphorically true, but not literally so. It is something that is meant to be taken as a metaphor only. Logos is something that is literally true. The Inuit quote is intended as mythos. It is not saying that a human can physically transform into an animal. What it is alluding to is that a common experience in shamanic trance work is often a sense of becoming an animal. In shamanism, this is known as shape-shifting. It is also common experience in shamanism to be able to communicate with animals. In fact, central to shamanism is the practice of working and communicating with what is known as a power animal. It is not a religion. One can find quotes similar to the Inuit one in other cultures from all over the world. The point is that shamanism was once our natural state, our natural way of being, the world over. In fact, the idea of indigenous tribes practicing shamanism is a distortion. In the West, being religious is an option. We can choose to be religious or not, and we can look around and pick the religion we want. For many Westerners, if we are religious at all, it may in reality be only a relatively small part of our daily life. Shamanism is different. It is not a religion. In indigenous cultures, there were no people in the tribe who were not shamanic. Yes, the tribe may have had a designated shaman or shamans, but everybody in the tribe would have lived and breathed shamanism. The shaman was simply the person who was better at it than other people, in the same way that in the tribe there would also be somebody who was the best at hunting, or best at looking after children, or best at storytelling, and so on. For indigenous people, shamanism was not something they did for only part of their daily life, nor was it something only the shaman did. Rather, it was in a very real sense that people actually were, how they experienced and related to the world around them, moment by moment. It was literally a way of being. Shamanism is, or was, our natural state. For our human ancestors, it is what it was to be truly human. It was intrinsic to how we lived. Now, if you accept the theory of human evolution, we modern humans, Homo sapiens, are somewhere between 160,000 and 200,000 years old as a species. Let us take the round figure of 200,000 years. This means that we have been living and breathing shamanism as a species for 200,000 years. Now, say in a hunter-gatherer society, you would have had children by the time you were age 20. This is 5 generations every 100 years. So, over 200,000 years, that is 10,000 generations of ancestors. Now imagine if each generation of your ancestors is represented by just one person, and they are standing behind you in a line of 10,000 people representing 10,000 generations. If each person is standing a yard-meter apart, the line is stretching back behind you for nearly 6 miles, nearly 10 kilometers. Now, taking another round figure, let us say that we stopped practicing shamanism here around 2,000 years ago. That is only the last 100 generations of your ancestors. That means 9,900 generations of your ancestors were shamanic. Put another way, this is a staggering 99% of your human ancestors lived and breathed shamanism. So, Shamanism is deeply familiar to us. It is in our ancestral DNA and literally wired into us. I know from teaching shamanism that once you get what it is, shamanism will feel deeply familiar to many of you who read this book. For many people, learning shamanism feels like they are remembering something that they already have. For many people, learning shamanism feels like they are remembering something that they already half knew, but had not realized that they had forgotten. Reconnecting with shamanism often feels like a homecoming, a reconnecting with a piece of oneself that has felt missing. In rediscovering or remembering shamanism, it often feels as if the world around one becomes more vibrant and alive. In fact, of course, what is happening is that we are waking up to the aliveness of the world around us, which is why the process is sometimes described as waking from sleep. In the next chapters, I will discuss the core shamanic beliefs and practices, and how shamans see the experience the universe, and how this relates to much of what we now are understanding in physics. I will explore what shamanism is for, what it can do for us, and what it offers the world. And I will discuss why we nearly lost shamanism, why we so desperately need it back, and why it is relevant, in fact, essential for the modern age.